to our first town hall discussion of the landscaping standards in the preserve. The decision to have the special landscaping assessment was made by a prior board, and the rollout should have had a meeting like this, but it didn't. That mistake is still causing irritation in some parts of the community. The current Kiawah board felt that the only way to resolve this was to let the community decide for themselves what the landscaping standard should be in the preserve. Shannon has put together a discussion of the differences between landscaping in the preserve versus landscaping in the rest of the island. Kiawah has no position on this, and that the presentation is not trying to promote one outcome or another. We simply hope that this allows you to make an informed decision about your community and the appropriateness of the assessment. So with that, Shannon, do you want to go through your presentation?
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. And Leah, you can see that?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So we're going to talk about landscaping on Kiawah. And as Dave mentioned in his opening comments, the Kiawah board is interested in, let's see, there it goes, is interested in permitting the members of the preserve to make an informed decision about their neighborhood's level of landscape. So the presentation today has several goals. One is to gain a shared understanding of landscaping around the island. We're going to talk about landscaping as a whole across the island and understand a little bit better who does what. We're going to understand the Kiawah standard for a neighborhood, and we're going to understand the preserve's current standard so we can juxtapose why they're different and allow the members in the preserve to make their informed choice. So let's talk about landscaping on Kiawah. And when we're talking about this, we're primarily today talking about road rights of way. So a road right of way, most of our members know that Kiawah owns the roads. And that's the way we often refer to it ourselves. We own the roads. But what we actually own is the road right of way. In most residential neighborhoods, that's about a 50-foot wide road right of way. Our roads in residential neighborhoods, our asphalt is approximately 22 feet wide. So that leaves 28 feet of land around that roadway that is actually deeded to Kiawah. So when we're talking about road rights of way, we're not talking about the asphalt, but we're talking about the land that surrounds that asphalt. So when we're looking at road rights of way across the island, there's lots of people participating in keeping the aesthetic of Kiawah that you see today. So it could be us, could be Kiawah partners in the club, could be the golf resort, the town, the regimes, or individual members. And we're going to talk about these different groups so everyone better understands who does what. So let's talk about the regimes for a minute. The regimes, there are 31 regime areas on Kiawah Island. Regime areas are neighborhood associations. They're smaller, they have their own governing boards, they have their own managers. So if you live, for instance, in Ocean Oaks, which is pictured here on the screen, you have a membership in the Ocean Oaks HOA, but then you also are a member of Kiawah as your master association. So many of the regime areas choose to maintain a heightened level of landscape for their neighborhood at the expense of their members. On the screen are some visuals for you of some of the areas that may be familiar to you, particularly single-family home areas like Summer Islands, Ocean Oaks, Ocean Green, the Settlement, and Indigo Park. Sparrow Pond is an interesting one. It is a cottage area, but it is one that came to Kiawah a number of years ago and said, you know what, we want to change the aesthetic of our neighborhood. We want our neighborhood to look different. And so they worked with Kiawah and they adopted the road rights of way within their regime and upgraded that landscaping, and then they paid to maintain it. So what does Kiawah maintain across the island? We do road rights of way to include cul-de-sacs, medians, and neighborhood entrances. We do leisure trails, pond bank edges, boardwalks, pond dock areas, and Kiawah facilities. And most of our members probably could name those things. probably could say, yeah, I know Kika does those things. So let's talk about, in particular, on this slide, the Kiawah Parkway, Governor's Drive and Ocean Course. So those are spine or parkway roads. And a number of years ago, our board of directors made the decision that those roads should be treated as the entryway to your properties. Those roads should have a more formal landscape level and a higher landscape level. So they are treated as parkway roads. And that's why you see the heavy irrigation, the heavy turf along those roads that we have deemed as parkway roads as entry to all the various neighborhoods on the island. So in a typical neighborhood, what does Kika take care of? We do roads and drainage, of course. We do any trails that move through a neighborhood, boardwalks if they're associated with the neighborhood, signage, so all the road signs, street signs, etc. If a Kika amenity is located within your neighborhood, for instance, in the preserve, Cinder Creek is located in your neighborhood. We take care of that. Road right-of-way landscaping at a typical standard. We do line of sight issues on roadways so that people can see as they're making the turns. We blow roads and we pick up debris. We do arborist work in the road rights of way. We've been doing a lot of that recently. We're taking out dead trees, we're lifting canopies and general cleanup in preparation right now for PGA, but we do it annually on lifting up canopies to ensure fire trucks and other large vehicles can get through. So let's talk about a typical neighborhood for a minute. So I picked Rhett's Bluff as a typical neighborhood example. Most people are familiar with Rhett's Bluff. They know what it looks like, so it's familiar enough to them to kind of talk through how Rhett's Bluff is maintained. So in front of undeveloped lots or open areas in Rhett's Bluff where there are no home sites, the road rights of way are not irrigated. They are not landscaped. They have natural growth. They're mowed weekly by Kika during the summer season and as needed in other times of year. If there's damage to the road rights of way, it's repaired by hydroseeding. So these are pictures from Rhett's Bluff. The top left is a corner with an undeveloped lot, and the bottom picture is a long undeveloped area where there are no home sites. If you take that and then you look at the pictures here, you can see a dramatic difference. So these are in front of developed homes. So in the Rhett's Bluff neighborhood, which is typical of most neighborhoods across Kiawah, members are encouraged to adopt the road right-of-way into their landscaping. So when they're doing their landscape plans and they're determining what their property will look like, usually at the start of construction, they're encouraged to adopt that 10, 12, 14 feet of road right-of-way and bring their landscape plan all the way to edge of asphalt, as these owners have done in Rhett's Bluff. If a developed lot owner would choose not to adopt the road right-of-way, then it's maintained at Kika's neighborhood standard. So it won't be irrigated. It'll be volunteer growth. We'll come through and mow it weekly in the summer, but it has a much different look. So as members start to make their own aesthetic decisions within this neighborhood of Rhett's Bluff on level of maintenance, on plantings that are in the right-of-way, turf species that are in the right-of-way, you start to get a patchwork appearance, or you start to see where the lot lines are. So you can definitely see if these properties are up against Kika's property, there's going to be a definite lot line definition there. It's not wrong. The Rhett's Bluff neighborhood is beautiful. We've all been back in there. It's just a design choice at the time of development that this is how this particular neighborhood was designed to operate. Entrances, medians, and cul-de-sacs. Kika maintains these within the Rhett's Bluff neighborhood. Most are maintained with natural plantings and drip irrigation. Some neighborhood entrances may be maintained with color beds as well. This is Rhett's Bluff's neighborhood entrance, as well as one of its medians. And again, that's Kika's to maintain. So let's talk about the preserve, because that's why we're all here today. And let's understand what makes the preserve different. And then you can understand the expenses associated with the preserve, and then you can make an informed choice between the two options that we're going to offer to you. So in 2018, leading into the 2019 budget, a decision was made not to subsidize additional landscaping expenses in the preserve and Ocean Park. So it's both neighborhoods where we increased a segment assessment for the landscaping. This is your history of preserve assessments across the last 4 years. You can see in 2018, it was $220 for an improved property or home. And in 2019, it made a jump of $1,000 annually. Initially in 2018, many of the expenses were estimated as these expenses were being segmented out of the larger Kika land management budget. In 2019, Kika made the move to ensure that all expenses being charged to the preserve members as part of their segment assessment were substantiated by invoice. Expenses are tracked completely separately from the land management budget. Preserve has its own accounts. So here is the preserve itself. Again, a road right-of-way within the preserve is pictured. So currently the preserve receives additional landscaping services over a typical Kiawah neighborhood. We talked about Red's Bluff. It was a different design choice in the preserve. The developer, when they designed it, put in irrigated road rights-of-way throughout most of the neighborhood and sodded it with St. Augustine grass. And then they conveyed all of those road rights-of-way with the irrigation and the sod to Kika to maintain. There are chemical applications required to maintain those road rights-of-way. If turf is damaged in the preserve neighborhood, we do it by sod replacement. We actually have new sod going in this week in the preserve in several locations, and many of you have probably seen that. Annual pine straw application to road rights-of-way is done in the preserve, mainly along that fence area. And that is, if it has not started today, it will be starting next week because all of that is coming into Island right now prior to PGA. And then you have the aesthetic detail of the fence in various locations throughout the neighborhood. So all of these additional landscaping services have resulted in a higher segment assessment for this neighborhood. In the preserve, Kika is paying for all of these things, whereas in the neighborhood like Red's Bluff that we talked about before, we're paying for medians, cul-de-sacs, neighborhood entrances, but not the long road rights-of-way like we have in the preserve. So what's not being charged to the preserve? When you pay your segment assessment, what are we not taking from that money? We are not taking any leisure trail maintenance. You've seen that we've gone in recently this spring to sand shell a lot of your trails. That's not being charged to you. Your pond maintenance, roads, drainage is not charged to the preserve members. Cinder Creek Pavilion and Dock, Eagle Point Boat Launch, Blue Heron, Tower are not being charged to members of the preserve. Those are community assets. Kika pays for those. So the Kika board wants to give you all an opportunity to decide what do you want for your neighborhood going forward in terms of landscaping. But to understand that, you have to understand the choice. You know what your neighborhood is now, and you know what it looks like now. You can choose to change the standard of the landscaping, but we want to talk about what will that mean, because you need to make an informed choice. So we're still talking about road rights-of-way. Again, this is pictured from the preserve. So Kika irrigation systems would be turned off in the road rights-of-way. We would shut them all down. Members may choose in front of developed lots to adopt the right-of-way area, like members in the preserve or in the Red's Bluff area do. You could adopt all the way to the asphalt. You could extend your irrigation into the road right of way, and you can maintain it as it's maintained today. You may also opt to make landscape changes to that road right of way area with ARB approval. Or you can allow that right of way area to return to natural growth because again, it will not be watered and there won't be chemical treatment to it. It'll be mowed by Kika and any repairs will be done by hydroseeding as opposed to today's sod replacement. If we move to areas where there's undeveloped lots, or there's open areas with no home sites, again, Kika's road right-of-way irrigation would be shut off, and it will be allowed to return to natural growth with no chemical treatment. It'll be mowed by Kika, it'll be repaired by hydroseed. So your medians and cul-de-sacs, because we talked about this in Reds Bluff, Kika irrigation will be continued to these specific areas. So you have several medians, I think 2 and maybe 9 cul-de-sacs back in the preserve. Those would all be maintained as they exist today. What they look like today is what they would look like in this next option. Your pond edges would remain the same. They'll be maintained as they exist today. They don't have irrigation now. Your view windows would continue to be maintained as they exist today. Your neighborhood entrance, we talked about Reds Bluff has a neighborhood entrance that Kika maintains. So we've defined, we had to do this for the board of directors, what would the preserve's neighborhood entrance be? And we have selected from on Blue Heron Pond Road, from Governor's Drive to your vehicular bridge. That would be your neighborhood entrance. We would maintain it as it exists today. That's a mix of both landscape beds and turf. So that irrigation would stay on and we would maintain it as you know it today. But once you cross the bridge, the irrigation on road rights of way would be shut off. So let's talk about preserve expenses. And there's a lot of stuff on this slide. So let's just kind of talk through it together. So this is 2020 actuals. So in 2020, Kika received in revenue $174,000. That is all from your segment assessments. That's what members of the preserve paid to Kika for the maintenance of their neighborhood. In 2020, Kika spent almost $182,000. So we're about $7,700 off that Kika had to supplement from the general assessments. Understand that your segment assessment is capped for Kika. It's a formula. We can only charge as a segment assessment half of the maximum assessment permitted. You're currently at the max based on that calculation. That calculation shifts every year, but you're currently at the max. You can see in the pie graph where your major expense areas are. Water and irrigation is 30%. Labor, that's the greenery contract who maintains the preserve for you. And then pine straw at 26%. The fence is much lower at 7%. Turf and planting replacement and electricity rounded out. You can see the actual numbers down in the lower right. Kika, of course, is trying to lower expenses in the preserve as much as we can. Irrigation water is one that we have tried very hard to lower. And you can see with the numbers there from 2018 to 2020 that it has come down about $30,000. That's through increased management, that's through using wetting agents related to the turf. And we had a really good year with rainfall in 2020. But even saving $30,000 compared to where we were in 2018 is not enough to decrease the segment assessment because we're still out of balance. And again, all of these 2020 expenses, these are based on invoices received to Kika. We don't put any estimates in the budget or in the expenses related to the preserve segment assessment. So there have been questions, and again, there's a lot of words on this page, I'm sorry, but for people reading it later, they can at least get the flavor of what we're talking about, but we'll kind of talk through it. So we made the decision to charge everything by invoice to your segment assessment. So some reasoned compromises were made in making this decision. While some expenses are being charged to preserve members currently, others are not being charged. And overall, we consider it a balance. So what is being charged to the preserve is irrigation of medians, cul-de-sacs, and your neighborhood entrance, and the labor to maintain these. Why? Those irrigation systems are part of larger road right-of-way systems. We would have to estimate in many cases what the water usage was. We would also have to estimate what the labor was to maintain these different areas. We want to do everything by invoice to you. So we are not dealing with estimates on what's charged. So currently preserve members are charged that. However, what you're not charged, and again, because it would be estimates, is labor for new sod installation when Kika's team does it. You had 2020 installation, which was shown on the previous slide. You have 21 sod installation going on now. It's being laid by Kika staff, and so you're not being charged for that labor. Labor and material for irrigation repairs. If we're talking about how much that is, that's approximately 8% of your total water bill. But because it's an estimate, we are not charging preserve members for it. Again, irrigation zone system checks to make sure your systems are functioning correctly, because you all have a lot of irrigation systems back there. And then labor for fence repairs and replacements. When we looked at this previous slide and the 7% for fence, that's only materials. There's no labor charge in that. The labor charge is being borne by Kika because it would be an estimate. So we estimate, in looking at these two different piles, that what is currently being charged to the preserve is about $18,000 to $25,000. And we estimate that the labor that's not being charged to the preserve is approximately $28,000. Kika considers these numbers relatively equal. But this is a question we've gotten quite a bit, so we wanted to take some time to explain it to you. This is a preserve budget for 3 years. This is 2019 and 2020 actuals and your 2021 budget currently. You can see that the assessment revenue has gone up a little bit. That's from an increase in assessments between 2019 and 2020, as well as your property mix. So obviously a developed property is paying twice the amount of an undeveloped property. So you're going to continue to see your assessment mix change as properties are developed in the preserve. Your expenses across the bottom, your average year of expenses approximately $190,000. So you can see that Kika is still out of balance. We did in the 2021 budget, based on experience from last year, lower your water budget to $60,000. You were at $53,000 last year in actual spent, but you had a really rainy year. We can't count on that every year, so we're at $60,000 in your budget. Your pine straw budget is at $47,000, which is based on what you paid last year for your pine straw. But Doug was able to renegotiate some pine straw this year, and the pine straw that's going in here shortly is just over $36,000. Same amount of pine straw. You still have 5 tractor trailers coming in, but you've got a reduced cost there. So Kika will see some savings there this year. So the Kika board is asking the preserve members to make a decision. Option 1 is you can keep the current standard with the additional landscaping services. The pro, it maintains the current aesthetic of the neighborhood as it was originally designed. The con, there's a higher segment assessment, and that remains in place. Your 2021 annual assessment was $1,302 if you have an improved property, and $651 if you have an unimproved property. Option 2, you can make a change in the standard, and you can eliminate the additional services that you receive in the preserve currently. The pro, it lowers your segment assessment substantially to the fence repair and maintenance only. And let's pause for a moment right here. The fence is not a part of this vote. The master developer retains decision-making related to the aesthetic detail of the fence. So the fence is not a part of this vote. This vote is only about your landscaping. So in option 2, you would lower your segment assessment substantially to fence repair and maintenance only. The con is it makes a significant change in the neighborhood aesthetic and potentially an inconsistent look throughout the neighborhood as neighbor to neighbor makes different decisions, or those properties now border Kika properties, which are maintained differently. I did an estimate of what your annual assessment would be if it lowered to fence repair and maintenance only. Obviously, this has to go through our budget process and through our board of directors. But if I just took the $14,000 that we're currently spending on your fence annually, it would drop your assessment to approximately $104 improved and $52 unimproved. And that's based on the mix of properties we had at the start of 2021. All right, so we're going to let you all decide. So we're running 2 neighborhood meetings. We're running one today and one on Wednesday. They'll both be put up on our YouTube channel so that your friends and neighbors can see them and view them if they were not able to attend one of the 2 sessions. We're going to open the vote to all preserve members on Monday, May the 24th, and we'll close the vote on June the 22nd. Our date of record will be next Monday, May 17th, actually 2 Mondays from now. It'll be Monday, May 17th. That is the date you must be an owner of the preserve by that date in order to participate in the vote. We have a lot of property closings going on right now, so that's our date of record. Vote information: 1 member of each property located in the preserve may vote. We are going to do weighted voting. Developed properties have 2 votes. Undeveloped properties have 1. The Kika board has stated that 51% of the preserve members must participate in this vote in order to make a change. So if 30% of the preserve members participate in the vote, and even if it's 90% saying they want to make a change, the Kika board will not make the change unless 51% participation or higher is achieved by preserve members. All voting will be electronic using Vote Now, which is the same software program that you're used to using for voting for the board of directors. Members without valid emails will be sent a letter via US mail directing them on how to vote online. Right now I have 4 properties without a valid email, and we'll make sure that they have an opportunity to weigh in as well. All right. That's the presentation. So if you have questions, Leah and Emily are going to help you with your questions and getting you in order so that we can have a productive discussion.
Go ahead and raise your hand. I think some of you joined after we showed you how to do this, but in case you aren't sure, go down to your participants button. It's at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop or desktop. It's going to be at the top of your screen if you're on a tablet. Hit that participants button and you'll get a pop out here that will list all of your neighbors. Simply click the raise hand button and a blue little hand will pop up so we'll know you have a question. I see Alice, it looks like you've got your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute.
Okay, first of all, thank you for this meeting. And Shannon, I thought you did a great presentation, just was spot on. And it was very educational to me. The only question I have is, if you know, how many undeveloped lots are there in the preserve right now?
Sure. So based on your 2021 assessments, that's the last time we checked it. So January, December, you had 96 improved, 79 unimproved. So you had 55% that are at improved properties for a total of 175 properties. Certainly that number can change as members choose to combine lots or uncombine lots. But as of January, you had 175 properties.
Great, thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Barnett.
All right, next is Tim Turner. Tim, or Tunner, go ahead.
Hi, and again, thanks for this presentation. I'm very new, so just bought a lot in January. So I'm still working with developers, builders. So I'd be obviously one of the undeveloped lots. And I just, one of the things, we had not even planned to move to Kiawah until we made that turn into the preserve the first time. And it's just a whole different world out there. And that's when we were like, oh yeah, we want to live here. So I guess my question is I was a little confused at first, but I think you clarified in the end, but I want to make sure that it's clear. If the vote is against any changes, that's to keep it exactly as it is right now, because when
Keep it as it exists today and what you see today. Yes, sir.
Okay, because the first, when you first started out, you started talking about the other neighborhoods, and it looked like you were talking about adding additional landscaping to those right-of-way areas. So that's not going to there's not going to be more mulch. There's not going to be more plantings and whatnot. I would just keep everything exactly the same. So then the other question is, it's obviously a little bit of a financial loss for Kika to keep it going as it is. So I want to make sure that there's not a question of them maintaining that, even though it is a loss, that they're not going to say, we need to do something to make this balance, that's not a question at this point.
It's not a question I've heard from the board of directors, but of course my chairman is on this call. Kika is still trying to actively manage the expenses, such as water, such as mulch, in order to hold the expenses in line.
No,
That would be my staff answer.
Just to be clear, there's no intention to change anything. If you vote to maintain the assessment, it'll be exactly maintained as it is today, and there's no intention to change that. The only question is, do you want to go to a different standard? And that's the only question on the table.
Okay, so the different standard is a lower standard, not a higher standard.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
It's
Okay.
a Kiawah. I would like to call it the Kiawah general standard.
Yeah.
Versus high or low, but
however you phrase it. Okay.
yes.
And if you don't vote, it essentially is a vote to keep it the same.
Well, except we do need a quorum.
We do need 51%.
So we need 51%. So I don't know how that works. I don't know if you get more people on one side or the other of that equation if you don't vote, but we would just really appreciate people voting so we can get a good sense of what the community thinks.
But if there's not a quorum, then it stays the same, correct?
That is true. That is true.
Thank you.
And Tim, welcome to Kiawah.
Yeah, thanks. We're excited.
All right, I see Perry has a question. Go ahead, Perry. Perry, you are muted. Go ahead and unmute. Just click that little microphone button.
Are you saying Perry or Terry?
Sorry, Perry. Perry
Perry,
Molina.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are, Perry. Go ahead.
Good, thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. I think that a lot of angst could have been avoided if this presentation had been available 3 years ago when the extra assessment was imposed. My question is, you have presented very detailed budget information on what it costs to maintain the preserve and allocated to the Kika costs and preserve costs. Have you done similar calculations for the other 31 or whatever number of areas there are, so that it's possible to say that the costs for the preserve are in fact X dollars higher per property owner, if you will, than the other areas on Kiawah?
So the 31 areas that you're referring to, I believe, are the regime areas. And those are not under Kika management. Those are under private management. So I can't compare the costs. I don't have access to their budgets.
But what about other areas on Kiawah?
So if you take, for example, Yeah, if you take Reds
Sorry?
Bluff, for example, our costs are substantially lower in Reds Bluff because we're not taking care of any road rights of way that are irrigated or turfed. We're only taking care of the medians, the cul-de-sacs, and neighborhood entrance in Reds Bluff, which is in fact a median itself.
All right, Lee, you are up.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for taking the time to do this. Tim, welcome to Kiawah and to the preserve. Listen, for what it's worth, for my neighbors and fellow residents, I don't know whether the issue at hand is one of the absolute dollars or of the way in which we've gotten here. I understand it was more the latter. But I want to ensure that at the end of the day, the tail doesn't wag the dog. These amounts are de minimis. And as I think Tim said, when he drove into the preserve, Tim, just so you know, we've only lived 3 years or so. And it was very much the same thing. And what I don't want to do is that the politics of this, and I don't have any interest in participating in the politics of it, but that the politics of it get in the way of having a spectacular neighborhood. Because irrespective of your home price, they're very expensive homes and very expensive dirt. And to be penny wise and pound foolish about grass and irrigation seems to me to be highly myopic. So I do understand that it matters that there is transparency. It matters that there is integrity. And I know that there are some assertions that has not existed. And again, I stay out of that. I just want to implore my fellow neighbors, find a way to figure that out, not at the expense of the beauty of our neighborhood. Because look, I'll pay what's necessary to make sure that, 32 Blue Heron Pond, because you can look me up. I guess there could be something burning in my front yard later today. 32 Blue Heron Pond looks absolutely flawless, but I'm part of a bigger community and neighborhood. And I'm going to rely on all of you to believe in that same thing. And there are parts of the island that frustrate me when I drive by them because they don't look as nice. I can't worry about that, right? I focus on the singular drive into the preserve when I make that turn, and on all of you maintaining beautiful homes and beautiful property. So this is my little way of politicking, of saying that if there are politics here, if there are frustrations here, let's figure out a way to solve them without dumbing down ultimately the quality of what we all enjoy. I mean, I'm not cavalier with my money, but I'm at a point where if a vote came down and said, you know what, we don't want to do this, I think there are people in this neighborhood that would say, we'll just subsidize those of you for whom you think this is a big deal. I'm not at that point now, but I'm not prepared to let my neighborhood, go into, looking like it's kind of, backcountry John's Island. So that's my points. Again, I want to be a positive neighbor. Look forward, hopefully, to seeing all of you next week or at the PGA, if you're not there like me full time, and appreciate your support of the preserve. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Lee. I actually had the honor of interviewing Lee on one of his interviews for the board of directors, and he is such a great interview. And I saw you were on here today and thinking, oh man, I can't do a presentation in front of Lee.
It's not very successful generally, apparently, but at least I'm hoping I can appeal to my neighbors in a different way. So thank you. I appreciate everybody listening to me drone on.
Thanks, Lee.
Janet, I saw you raising your.
I can't find when I pull up. Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it.
Well, when I pull up participants, I can't find how to do the little hand thing.
No problem.
But okay. I just wanted to say a couple things. I moved here at the end of January last year, so right before COVID. And at the end of our road, I'm at 21 Blue Heron, there was no grass. And, obviously a lot more important things were going on, and we, never said anything. We figured they'd get to it. Well, now we're May 2021, and some people drive in and would jokingly say, what'd you do, run out of money? You don't have any grass, your front entrance looks terrible. And I sort of kept thinking, well, they're going to come and fix it, and they're coming. And of course, no one ever has. And I made a call, and they were very responsive, came out, dug everything up, put down new sod. But I did go a few hours with no water. And it turned out that they'd hit our main water line somehow, and all the water was going into the lagoon. Anyway, my only thing I would say about voting to change it. If you go over to Rhett's Bluff, all of us have probably been there. Do we feel, and I'm using that as an example because that's sort of what we've been using here. Would anyone feel that Rhett's Bluff doesn't look nice? You know, and they don't pay what we pay over here. And I guess my only concern is every couple of years, we're just going to keep getting charged more and more. So I guess that would be my only comment is when I go to Rhett's Bluff to visit people, I never think that their neighborhood doesn't look nice.
Thank you, Janet. I agree. Reds Bluff is a beautiful neighborhood. It was a different design choice at the time the developer designed Reds Bluff versus when they designed the preserve.
One more question I would ask too. If it would go down to where we were in charge really of our own property, would the sprinkler system that is out in front of your property be hooked into your own sprinkler system so that you'd have to put in your own system out there? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely.
Does anyone else have questions? It looks like Beth Driscoll, maybe? Go ahead, Beth.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for making the presentation. I've been on Kiawah 30 years, so I have one perspective that I'd like to share. Costs continually go up, and I understand them, but I also am a purchasing agent for the Boeing company. So I'm going to state that it's very important that costs are monitored, because while it might be $1,000 this year, it can be $20,000 before you know it. Because 30 years on Kiawah, I see what happens as costs continue to increase. So my main point, and I think the emphasis is, we need to make sure that whatever we're paying for, we actually have delivered, such that if the requirement is $58,000 of labor, is someone calculating that that is in fact labor that was used in the preserve. That comes from being in purchasing my whole life. I don't want to waste money, whether it's $1 or whether it's $10 million. It needs to be spent wisely and correctly, because as we get to retirement age, some of our incomes may grow substantially, some may not. But regardless of what our incomes are, we want the appearance to be done well. And if there's someone that's supposed to be managing that, then let's use those expenses wisely. And I will have to say that sometimes I go to Rhett's Bluff and it actually looks better than the preserve, because I feel like the ponds aren't cut back. And I know that option 2 would still mean that we'll get the improvements being performed at the entrance of the preserve. So there'll be no change to that. So I'm all about making sure that costs are looked at wisely, especially the higher cost areas like labor, water, irrigation. Whether we go with option 1 or if we go with option 2, I think we can trust that neighbors would make sure that their properties look well, even if they have to maintain them. So I just trust that we need to make wise decisions with cost, whatever they are. For those of you who are new, and for me who came here 30 years ago, I can assure you the costs continue to go up. So I'm just about monitoring cost wisely. And if I allowed increases at the Boeing company, I would no longer be into purchasing. In fact, we have to drive decreases every single year. And in fact, in order for a contract to be given for more than 2 years, we have to build in cost reductions every year. So it comes from that background. That's my perspective. But I don't believe in just thinking that costs going up makes things improve. I think there's a standard that needs to be maintained. And if someone's going to be delivering whatever it is, pine straw or mulch or labor, it needs to be monitored to make sure that we get what we pay for. That's the summary. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Beth. It's nice to talk to you. I haven't talked to you in a number of years. You talked about costs, and I can absolutely appreciate that. We talked about irrigation and trying to lower that cost over the last few years for you. We talked about the pine straw that Doug went out to bid on the pine straw to try and lower that cost again for you and brought it down by about 10 or 11,000 this year. We also, related to the labor, is done by the greenery. So that's all invoiced by the greenery. The greenery only works for Kika in the preserve. That's the only place that they work. So all of those labor hours are allocated to the preserve.
All right. Can we go to David O'Leary? David?
Thank you. I couldn't get the hand thing, so I don't know where it is on Zoom. I looked and it must be my bad. I couldn't see it. I thank all the Kika people for putting together the presentation. I guess I would like to start off a little bit and saying we've owned in the preserve since for about 12 years. We've lived here full time for 9. And one of the things that we've noticed in our time in the preserve is that it's a destination for the people to come visit this island. And you can measure that by the amount of rental bikes that come through the preserve. It is truly a place that people come. And it appears that we're not getting credit for that. Now, I understand that Kika is saying it's going to maintain Cinder Creek, it's going to maintain the landing, and I get all of that. But as far as the fact of selling the island, the preserve is definitely a destination for all the visitors that come here, and there has to be some recognition for that. It also appears to me, having been here now, coming here, not as long as Beth, living here, but having come to this island since 1998, that I would submit to this group in Kika that the level of care and the quality that is in the preserve is no different than the rest of Kiawah. It is not at a higher standard than the rest of Kiawah. When I get on my bike and I ride around, I have sent many pictures to different people at Kika. Your photographs were lovely. There are many, many spots in the preserve that we're paying for that are nothing but dirt ground. They are just bare. And these are in front of people's homes, as well as on common area as you drive down Blue Heron Pond or other parts of the preserve. So I'm not quite sure, back to Beth's point, that we are getting what we're paying for with some of these things. And so what I've heard from this presentation, I want to make sure I'm understanding the choices properly, is that we can continue to pay the extra assessment that we pay and get what we're getting today, which is being told to us that it's a higher level than the rest of the island, which we can either argue for or against, or we can go to an approach that says we as owners will be responsible for that which is in front of our home. And we can choose to either maintain it the way it's been maintained and water it, or we can choose to let it go natural. That would be a choice that we would make. What I also heard from Sharon's presentation is that the board, and this I guess would be a question for Dave Morley, the board has decided that the entrance to the preserve is from Governor's to the bridge. My question is, Dave, when you go over the bridge and you start to take that right, you have that whole common area where Kika has put benches in. Why would that not be considered part of Kika maintenance and have to maintain it? Going back to some of the earlier comments of making sure that the preserve has the entrance it needs to have, it would appear to me that those common areas as well should be areas that Kika would want to maintain so that it would have some semblance of consistency in the preserve for other areas. But I guess I'm going back to my points is I want to make sure I'm understanding our choices properly. I'd like to understand from Dave Morley directly why we would stop at the bridge and not go over the bridge, take over those areas. And more importantly, going back to Beth's comment on maintaining some of these things, I will tell you that I call Kika on a regular basis, and I haven't called this week and I apologize, but if you come down Gray Widgeon, when you get to, I believe it's 9 Gray Widgeon, the Grande house, just before then, one of your sprinklers is like a complete bubbler because your landscaping crew, the landscaping crew took it off again. And every single time you run the sprinklers, it's got a little gusher going. And as my wife likes to point out, the speed in which the landscapers cut the lawn in the preserve, the rate at which they move, we're not quite sure the blade even goes around once at the rate in which they're cutting through the preserve. And they've scalped off part of the land already on the preserve. And this is the extra service that we're paying for. So I'm not quite sure we're getting much more than what we're getting in other parts of the island. So I will pause and hopefully get some responses from Sharon and Dave Morley.
Sure, Mr. O'Leary, and let me jump in before Dave answers you from a board perspective. We do have Doug Walter on the call, who's our Director of Land and Lakes, and I know that you've spoken with Doug many times as you've addressed issues together within the preserve, trying to make things better for yourself and your neighbors. So he's taking note of those comments. I think in terms of.
I would, Shannon, if I can interrupt, first of all, he's done great. Regrading that parking lot in Gray Widgeon has been perfect.
Yeah.
You guys did a lot of work at Cinder Creek at my wife's behest, and the paths at Cinder Creek were done very well. So thank you very much, Doug, for that work, and also for addressing the paths and through the preserve as well, that I know you spent a disproportionate amount of time listening to my bride talk about the challenges with that.
Well, that's what we're here for. And so I know that you know Doug well, and he's been helping you out. He's on this call. He's listening for these specific type of issues so that he can work with the greenery on improving within the scope of our current contract, what we're doing. Certainly, if the members of the preserve opt to keep the current landscape standard, what you have today, it certainly wouldn't be inappropriate for Doug to put your landscaping contract out to bid and try to get the best contractor in there for you. But we can cross that bridge once the vote has happened.
And David, I was just going to say, I was going to say partly what Shannon said. I haven't been part of the decision on what the definition of the entrance is. Doug and Shannon made a recommendation, and it seemed reasonable to me. But I can't articulate, is that exactly the right place for the line to be? So I don't have a lot of input for you on that. I'm sorry.
So Dave, you come into the preserve, right? Because I know you've been over here.
Yeah.
So when you cross the bridge, you know that area I'm talking about. It's literally just probably at 1 o'clock in your vision as you cross the bridge where the alligators.
Okay.
And there's a bench there. And then when you turn right, there's that other sitting here where there's another bench. And I always find it fascinating when our visitors like to sit there and try and get close to the alligators, but we warn them, and then it's their call as to what they want to do. But they don't think they're dangerous, and that's fine. But to me, that's the entrance of the preserve. It's not up into the bridge, because if you're going to let that area go natural, which you could decide to do, but if you're going to let that area go natural, I think you're really diminishing the entrance to the preserve, in my opinion.
I'm happy to look at that, and this vote, the expense of a slightly different definition of that would not be enough to change the direction of the vote. But if there's something there that Doug and follow Doug's lead on this, that he thinks that there's something that we should change in that, we could do that independent of the vote. So
Okay.
I don't dismiss it. I'm willing to look at it. I just haven't spent time thinking about that. So,
and I guess, Dave, from your point of view, from the board's point of view, do you believe that the preserve actually has a higher level of aesthetics than other parts of the island based upon what we are paying as the chairman of the board? And thank you for joining this call, for charging us this. Do you believe that what is here today is better than the rest of the island?
Well, the thing that makes it a little bit confusing is because in the rest of the island, homeowners are maintaining it. And so I'm about to resod my front parkway myself. I just put in the order for it last week, and I irrigate it. And so I hope that my front road right away is the same standard as the preserve, but I'm doing that myself. And so
I appreciate that, but also if we were to vote, and I'm not saying which way it would go, but if we were to vote to go back to the old way and only have to pay for fences, my understanding is that Kika holds us all accountable to certain standards in our property through livability. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So we couldn't let back to somebody's earlier comment, we couldn't let our property go to, Hillbilly Joe, because Kika would come in and say, no, you're not maintaining your property to certain standards of Kika. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's not quite correct.
Well,
let's talk about what would happen, because you would still go in and mow, you would still hydroseed, it wouldn't be irrigated, but you wouldn't allow something to just grow wild. I mean, if I'm understanding the question, if I'm misinterpreting the question, please correct me. But the idea that it would be Kika that came in and said, no, you have to do X, Y, Z. What we would do, my understanding is, and you can correct me, Shannon, is that we would still mow, we would still hydroseed periodically at whatever the need rate was. And we wouldn't go to a community owner or a property owner and say, you have to do something different.
And Dave, you and I heard the question differently.
Okay.
So, you know, you're correct in everything that you said, Dave. If a homeowner, a developed homeowner, chose to adopt the road right of way into their landscaping, and this is the way I heard the question, and they extended their landscaping out into the road right of way and adopted it under their care, if they then let that property go, like if Dave Morley let his property go on Nicholas Lane once he had incorporated it into his landscaping, then yes, we would go to the owner and we would say what's going on. And we would talk to them about it. But if the homeowner had chosen to allow that area in front of their home to be maintained by Kika going forward, then that's Kika's responsibility.
So Shannon, if the vote goes that we don't want to have a higher standard, right? And we're down to $100 or whatever it is for the fences.
Right.
And each homeowner, each property owner decides if they're going to, I guess, have Kika mow that, or if they're going to let, and I'm just going to use this, let the straw extend to the road.
Right.
That would be an individual homeowner decision. Is that what we would have once the vote?
We would have to do individual homeowner decisions, and we would have to communicate with each of you so that Doug understands what he's doing in front of all of the developed properties.
So to the point that if my wife, who makes all the decisions, decides to extend the I call it hay, but extend the straw to the road and let natural growth occur. Back to one of the earlier gentleman's questions, if my wife, which would never happen, let that go to hell in a handbasket, to use a phrase, Kika livability would knock on our front door saying, okay, we understand you guys wanted to extend that. We understand you wanted it to be that way, but it can't be this bad. You got to clean that up.
Correct, sir.
And my understanding is that if you don't clean that up, we'll clean it up and we're sending you a bill.
We do have the right to do that. We try to do it, not very often.
Yeah.
It's an adversarial position with a homeowner, but yes, we maintain that right.
And the choice would still be available.
Preserve all falls apart because you're still going to have control in air. You're still going to have the ability to oversee the preserve so it doesn't fall apart.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and that we would, I would assume that there would be a middle ground in that debate that you just presented, in that we could say, maybe you would like to go to the Kiawah Island standard, and we would figure out how to get to that.
Right.
Yeah, but I guess the point, Dave, is for the vote, is it the preserve standard or the Kiawah Island standard? And the Kiawah Island standard, then we have a second decision working with Shannon and Doug saying, cut my grass because I'm going to keep the grass and I'm going to water it and I'm going to maintain it. Or I'm going to I'm going to let the natural thing come in there and you don't have to, and Doug doesn't have to worry about cutting in front of my house. Those would be the other choices we'd have to make.
No, I understand. I was just trying to clarify that it's something you could always go to the standard where we hydroseed and cut. You could always change your mind and go back to that standard.
Okay.
Over time. That's all I was trying to raise, but I understand your point, and I think the clarifications are helpful.
And the fact that Kika would not let my property go to total disarray.
We will have a conversation.
Doug would be at my front door saying,
It's not Doug that will be there, but yeah. You understand. We're good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take up so much time, but I was asking for clarification.
No, you're fine. Thank you for being here.
And Dave Morley, you're going to talk to Doug about extending, and Doug will want to extend it into over the bridge if we're going to make that the entrance, right, Doug?
Well, I would just like to understand it better. I'm not promising what the answer to that question is, but I am willing to spend time to understand it better.
My wife will bake for Doug. It'll be that way. She'll bake and break.
Is that how Doug gets bribed? You do
not that there's any bribe involved for Doug because he's too healthy. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, we've got Beth again. Beth, go ahead.
Yes, thank you again. Both Dave O'Leary and Dave Morley are dear friends of mine. So just understand, I think so highly of them. But Dave O'Leary, you brought up one more point. I just want to see accountability. And Lynn is so very proactive. I know she calls when things are needed, but I'd like to see if we continue with option one, which may happen because I'm not sure that we'll have the amount of voters that we'll need. But my point is we do need accountability for what we should be receiving, because I don't know when I drive to the preserve if it looks as good as it once did. And I have a long perspective. So I'm just always asking for accountability that expenses are actually incurred and monitored no matter what they are, because I don't know that we'll have the full amount of votes. So if it turns out that we continue with the current situation, I would ask that somehow we improve that accountability factor so that labor hours are measured more effectively, that costs are monitored and quotes are obtained going forward with maybe a different company as was suggested. So thank you very much.
Sure thing, Beth.
I don't see anyone else's hands raised. Does anyone have a question? But if you do, you're welcome to just, oh, I see William, go ahead, you can unmute.
Yes, Will Money, and I live on Chinaberry in the back of the preserve. And I had two questions. The first being, will there ever be a time that we might see a true bike path through the preserve so we would not have children riding down the middle of a very narrow road? I realize, as Dave has said, we're exactly correct. We are a destination, and sometimes there are 10 people riding together all over the place, and our roads are narrow. The trucks are on it all the time. The roadways themselves are not cleared very well. We have fronds sticking out into the roadways, which I've had to cut back myself just so when I'm driving out, I'm not going to see someone as soon as I come around the curve. And the question would be, is there any plan to change the character of the reserve in terms of being able to make it a little bit safer? That's the first question. And then the second question would be, why is it so random? Once in a while there's grass, then there's 500 yards of no grass and some bushes that were put in and some grasses that were put in that are wild grasses. And then there's trees all the way up to the roadway. And then all of a sudden we've decided that along the edge of Blue Heron itself, we're going to have grass for the next 200 yards. It at times seems like it's a hodgepodge of the design is neither consistent nor is it say appropriately applied for the places that we're actually going to be visualizing and seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Money. And by the way, I love the background that you have on your Zoom call with your alligator there.
I think that's about a week ago or so that alligator was crossing the road at the second gate. I just kind of like that and put that up for a while.
Yeah, I thought that was our second gate.
There's several other alligator pictures. I got one, I guess about 3 days ago of about a 9-footer on the bank of Cinder Creek. Anyone who doesn't believe that they live in Cinder Creek is sorely misled.
They are mistaken. If it's a water body in South Carolina, you have to assume there's an alligator there. So related to your questions, your first question was about a leisure trail. At this point, there is no current plan to put in additional leisure trails in the preserve. It would have to be looked at, and costs would have to be looked at and factored in to see if that could become a priority, but there are no plans currently. In terms of design within the preserve, Doug can certainly look at what's in the preserve and make sure that things are looking a little more consistent within the scope of our current contract. And he can definitely do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Shannon, one last point of clarification. I think you said you need 51%. You said there were 175 properties in the preserve between developed and undeveloped? Is that the right?
No, so this is according to the January assessment. So again, date of record will be May the 17th. So we'll take another cut and count of preserve. But at the January assessment, there were 175 properties in the preserve. If you take the improved versus unimproved, that's 192 votes on improved, 79 votes on unimproved properties for a total of 271. Again, that number might shift.
51% of the 271 or 51% of the 175?
51% of the 271.
Oh, okay.
That's the same way that we do it with elections for quorum and all of that. It's the same
Yeah.
definition that we use consistently.
One more question with regard to the assessment itself. I recognize that unimproved properties have lots of water and perhaps the grass has been continually mowed and attended to in front of them. And the decision that they should pay half of what someone who has a home in the preserve is made upon some logic or reason. I just don't understand it.
That's just based on how our covenant language is. That's across the island.
So that was one of the advantages given to the developer when they were first building here.
Yeah, I wasn't here in the 1970s, so I can't answer that question, but it is a covenant definition.
Why does the covenant definition apply to us deciding as to how we're going to maintain our neighborhood? I don't
The segment
understand that.
assessment, the segment assessment and what the segment assessment is.
But this is a different, isn't this a different type of assessment that we're not talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about a segment assessment, and that is also defined in the covenants. Just like your V-Gate assessment is considered a segment assessment as well.
I don't see any other hands raised. Does anyone want to just unmute their microphone? If you have a question, please feel free to speak up.
Leah, I would like, before we sign off, to make a closing comment at whatever time is appropriate. So,
Anyone have anything? Dave, I think it's appropriate.
okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the good questions, and that new things may come to mind. And please email us. This is our first. We have another meeting coming up. If you think that there's something that we should do differently to make it better the next time, please let us know. And we will try to respond as quickly as possible to any new questions as you've had time to think about it as we go forward, so that the voting doesn't start until after the PGA. So there's plenty of time here for us to get back to you with new information if there things do come to mind. And so please feel free to reach out.
And Shannon, who do you want people to contact?
It can come to the executive office, or you can put that in there.
All right, I'll put that in the chat, the exec office at Key.
We'll field those.
Okay.
Doug has to get ready for PGA.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. This is helpful to us, and I hope it was helpful to you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.